Oh, you having sound problems?
We were.
Now we're good, huh?
I think that this is just lagging.
But we're good with sound now, I can tell. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So one of the things that I want to talk to you guys about is that when people are talking about being a great entrepreneur or a great real estate agent or somebody that's great in business, like, again, you're not born with every skill. You usually have propensity to be good at one thing or another, but one that comes up time and time again is negotiation. And I'm going to tell you guys, negotiation is a skill. It's something that needs to be learned over time. It needs to be practiced over time. It needs to be rehearsed and refined over time. We're not just born natural, great negotiators. And most people have little to no experience negotiating large things in general. So as an example, a real estate transaction for most people is one of, if not the largest financial transaction in their life. The problem is that they may have little or no experience in negotiating before getting involved in that. So if I'm going to be their real estate agent representing them, it's incredibly important. And I would imagine if you hired me, you would be hoping and demanding that I was a really good negotiator. So what I'd like to do is show you what I've learned over my career, a couple of concise tips about becoming a great negotiator. And so I titled it Lessons Learned from the Ivy League, because one of the things that I realized after the businesses grew and my negotiations became bigger, which meant a couple of things. Number one, the stakes were higher. And also I was dealing with bigger and bigger players that were more experienced negotiators. So always wanting to do better, I went out seeking knowledge, training, and expertise in becoming a better negotiator. And so where did I find it? At Ivy League schools. There's programs that somebody like me that's not even enrolled in an Ivy League school can go learn from. And I found one in negotiation. And so I immersed myself into the skills, into the talents involved, into the practice, into all of the things that I thought you were supposed to do in a negotiation that maybe were wrong. And I'd like to share 3 big takeaways from my negotiation training with you guys. So if you'd like to hear 3 of those tips learned from the Ivy League, comment below. Let me know, because I want to know if you guys are interested in negotiation, which I hope you are, because it's a big part of all businesses. But for you real estate agents, of course, it's a huge part of your business. So let's get into the tips. Hannah, we all good?
Yep,
We're good on our set. By the way, we've got Hannah working the comments, and she's working the Twitter feed. She's off camera over here. I'm not talking to myself. So say hi to Hannah. I'm sure she'll be diving in the comments and making sure to talk to you guys as well. All right, let's get into tip number 1. And tip number 1 is one of the most important, and it's why I put it as number 1. It's skills in negotiation, which I'm going to show you is the initials BATNA, which is BATNA, or Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. In other words, anytime you enter into a negotiation for something, you need to know, if I don't get what I want, what is my best alternative? In other words, what's my leverage? And then ultimately, what's my breaking point? And so one of the most famous stories that's told about understanding your BATNA is when Theodore Roosevelt, old Teddy Roosevelt, was running for president. There's a famous story that's been in trainings for years about negotiation, about when he was on a good old-fashioned train whistle stop, and they had printed thousands of brochures with a picture of Teddy Roosevelt on there that they had forgotten to get permission from the photographer for. So in those days, the penalties for using copyrighted material without the photographer's permission were pretty steep. The fines, I believe, would have been $3 million or so to the campaign if this photographer had sued him under his rights, which would equal like $60 million today. I mean, it would have been unbelievable. So the famous story is the campaign manager for Teddy Roosevelt sent a telegram, and this telegram to the photographer, and basically said, we are seeking to use photos of Mr. Roosevelt on a campaign stop flyer. How much are you willing to pay us to do so? Please respond immediately. And the photographer responded, well, I've never done anything like that before, but all I can afford is $250. Will that work? Follow the story? Who knew their leverage and who knew their best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Obviously, the people on the president's side. You see, that photographer did not know that they had already printed all of those flyers and brochures. He did not know, possibly at all, that he had legal rights or that he could sue this presidential candidate, soon to be president. He didn't know his best alternative. So the telegram, by saying, hey, if you pay us, we'll use it, not knowing his other options, he gave in. You follow the drill here? So what's most important that you guys need to understand is what happens if you enter into a negotiation and you don't get what you want. You need to be prepared to understand, where's my leverage? What's my breaking point? What level will I not go past? It's incredibly important because so many people enter negotiations with one thing in mind. I need to win and you need to lose. I need to win. Periscope, I need to win and you need to lose. That's not how you negotiate. And so what I want you to understand about the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, think if that photographer knew that those flyers had been printed without his permission and knew what the law was. You think he would have said, sure, let me give you $250. I think the telegram response probably would have looked a little bit different, wouldn't it? And let's say that he would have asked for X amount of dollars that was somewhere within the threshold of what the campaign could afford for their mistake. I bet he would have received money rather than paying money. That's knowing your best alternative. The photographer did not know. The campaign took a shot. And so what I want you guys to understand anytime you enter into a negotiation is that, for instance, if an employee walks into their boss's office and asks them for a raise based on X, Y, and Z, they need to be prepared what to do if the boss says no. Because if you're not prepared on what to do, there's not a whole lot that's going to happen that's going to be good as a result if you say no. Or if the boss says no, rather. You've got to know what's your best alternative. Is it, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to quit? That's an option, but you've got to be prepared to do it. Or, I'm sorry I asked, I'll keep working here, I actually love my job, I just wanted to see if I could get more money? Well, now who's got the leverage going forward in that relationship? So the other idea with real estate that we talk about all the time is be prepared to lose the house or to lose the deal if you're not going to overpay, or as a seller, if you're not going to accept below a certain number. Understand your best alternative may be you're back on the market. So make sure anytime, especially on behalf of a client, that you're entering into a negotiation, know what your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is. So that's tip number one. And I hope that really helps you guys. If you've never heard that before, hopefully that's something that you can keep in mind as you go. You've got to know your leverage. You've got to know your position. You've got to know where you're willing to go. So if you've got a question, guys, this is the opportunity. This is your chance. If you want to comment or question about tip number one, please put it. I'm pointing to the comments on Facebook below. Or on Twitter, use Periscope, folks. Use the hashtag office hours and ask right away. All right. So David Letterman style, I'm going to get rid of tip number one. Tip number two, and this is a really good one. I'd like to start with, do you know what an anchor is in a negotiation? Anybody that's watching out there, you guys watching the live feed, if you know what an anchor is, post what you think an anchor is in a negotiation below. I'm going to give you guys a second. Post what an anchor is in a negotiation. Because I think it's important that we frame what an anchor is before I explain to you what you need to do with it. So I'm going to give a second. Hannah, are they posting what an anchor is? Anybody giving you their definition? You should know what an anchor is in a negotiation. Otherwise, you need to go back to tip number one. So what an anchor is in a negotiation, while you guys are posting, I want to make sure you understand, is if me and you are negotiating for real estate, An anchor is where I come right out the gates with a super strong, really high offer, and I'm like, here it is. What just happened? Everything went blank. Am I still broadcasting? Okay, my screens went blank. I really got into that. So what an anchor means, if we're negotiating something, it's where somebody presents. Let's say that we're negotiating for anything, this notebook, and I say $100. Well, that's the anchor. It's the first offer. It now becomes the basis on which all other discussions are based on. But what I want you guys to understand is the tip here is the proper way to diffuse an anchor. So the proper way to actually respond when the original offer or the anchor is absurd. So in real estate, the analogy is, what do you do as the listing agent when a buyer that's seen the house 3 times, asked 1,000,000 questions, obviously loves it, and then they present you this just low, ridiculous offer? That's now the anchor to the buyer. The anchor to the seller is the asking price, right? That's what it's on the market for. So the proper way to diffuse an anchor is to immediately make sure you respond with how you feel about it. So that's your note. It's really important. And when I say how you feel about it, it's from your position of negotiation. So if we're talking about this notebook and I tell you $100 and you're going, Chris, you're crazy. That notebook's only worth $5. Well, I just set the anchor at 100 and you're thinking, I'm not paying any more than $2. To diffuse me, you would want to say, well, Chris, honestly and respectfully, it's a great notebook, but we think it's more in the range of this. So if we're that far apart, we kind of need to come to terms or have a discussion about that, because the difference between $100 and $2 is pretty big. Maybe there's no deal to be made. You see, now me, I'm going, I'm going to lose a sale because I was trying to get too much money. If you diffuse me, it might make me go, yeah, you're right. I just wanted to see what you would say. How about $10? Right? And that happens in real estate all the time. The anchor, it becomes the center of discussion. And so oftentimes that's the sales price. That's the number. And we get caught. So people say, well, never make the first offer. Well, then the other side is when you make the first offer, you sort of set the tone for discussion either way. You set the tone as in, I'm really serious here and this is what I think it's worth. Or you set the tone in the opposite way, I'm not serious. And so a way a seller can respond to a buyer they don't think is serious is to immediately just reject the offer and not even counter and just say that's so far from what we're asking for and what we know this house is worth. There's no reason for us to even have a discussion or fill out any more paperwork. So by knowing my best alternative, okay, and understanding where I'm willing to negotiate, tip number 2, diffusing an anchor is to immediately respond to it and immediately give feedback. So I want to make sure that you understand it's not emotional feedback, it's just feedback, right? Well, Chris, that's ridiculous. This notebook's not worth $100. Immediately tell me. Otherwise, that becomes the anchor of negotiations, which means we're now talking around $100 instead of what it might actually be worth. Does everybody follow that? All right. So that's my skill number 2. That's negotiation skill number 2, which is to immediately diffuse an anchor means you need to acknowledge it and provide feedback from your side of the transaction. I think that's incredibly important. Hannah, you like that one?
Yep.
We got some questions. If you guys like that one, make sure you post. If you're watching on Periscope, give me some hearts. Give me some hearts on Facebook. Come on, man. It's after 7. What is it? 7:15 on a Wednesday, and I'm here to help you guys do your job better. So give me some love. Share this with your friends. Share this with fellow agents in your office. We want everybody to do better because bad negotiations don't help anybody. All right. All right. Let's move on to tip number 3. Tip number 3 is the most obvious, which is be prepared. Prepare, prepare, prepare. One of the reasons negotiations go poorly, or that people that are negotiating something that's important struggle, is because they show up to the table less than prepared. And so I want to really focus on real estate in this example, because knowing your numbers, knowing the factual information, knowing all of the details, having prepared everything in advance, talk to your clients, knowing their BATNA, their real position, helps you understand exactly the situation before you begin. Because if you begin negotiating from an unprepared position, you are going to lose any leverage that you might have had. And generally, you're going to end up being the guy that doesn't get what they want, and you're going to be regretfully thinking of what you could have done differently. So as an example, if you're going to negotiate for a piece of real estate, you have got to know what you actually think it's worth on the open market. You see, I've worked in real estate for a long time, and I've dealt with a lot of buyers. And one of the biggest things that buyers do, and you real estate agents out there, give me a heart, Periscope or Facebook, if you've had this experience, they say, well, I want to offer X. And it's just a number. It's an arbitrary number that they just came up with. They go, well, that sounds good, based on nothing. If that's ever happened to you, let me know, because it happens to me all the time. And so my job as an agent is to be prepared. And the way I prepare is to make sure that the buyer understands, before we present our first offer, what I think and what we think based on market statistics, based on what other properties are going for, right? Based on my analysis and expertise, what I think and we think this property is likely worth. You see, that becomes maybe our anchor in our position, and that should never be some arbitrary made-up number. Like, I just feel like the house is worth this number. Well, that's nothing. You get caught in numbers. It sounds good. But if I show you that a house is worth 450, the market data supports it, and let's say the seller's asking 465, and then you say, oh, well, I want to offer 419. Well, as your agent, I'm just going to say why. Not because I think you're wrong, not because I just want to know where you're coming from. And if your answer is, I don't know, I think that's a good place to start, then my job as the negotiator on your behalf is to make sure that we frame the discussion, we know the position. So in this example where we think it's, look, my market data says 450 and this house is listed at 465, then I would want my buyers to understand, if we get this thing around 450, we did a good job. That's what the market's supporting. So if the buyer gets hung up on these really low numbers, the problem is they'll end up losing a house that maybe they could have easily had just because of that arbitrary number. So guess what? Expert tip. What did I just do? I combined all three in one discussion with my buyer, didn't I? Did y'all follow that? I just did all three. So how did I do that? By preparing. So by preparing and knowing what we think that house is worth, by studying the market, by really knowing, it's my job to really know what this house is worth. Because what does every buyer on the planet want? A deal. But a deal has to be relative to what a property is actually worth. Nothing else matters. So how did I combine all three with that buyer? Well, number one, what am I doing? I'm preparing. What's our best alternative to a negotiated agreement? I'm preparing them for the idea that if we offer something that I think is way below what it's likely worth, then we might frame ourselves as not serious and we might not even get a response. Okay, tip number two, I diffused their anchor. They said 419, and I simply said, as your agent, my job is to get you the best deal. I want to know where you got that number from. I want to know why you want to offer 419. And if they say, oh, it just sounds good, or it's a good place to start, then that's where tip number three comes in, where I educate and explain to my buyer, make sure that they understand, listen, they're asking 465. We think you agreed based on our analysis that I did, preparation, prepare, that it's worth 450. So anything we do that gets us that house at 450 is good. offering way below that, thinking that's going to get us a deal, may not necessarily be the good strategy. May not be right. And so the point is, notice there's a lot of communication involved in a proper negotiation. There's also a tremendous amount of skill involved. Like the idea of being a people person or being very friendly and easy to get along with. Look, I think that on those things, and I think that, when it comes to sales and speaking and those things, like, look, that's what I think that I was born to do. Negotiation takes practice. You got to negotiate things. Like, you got to really go through the motions. Let somebody put you through the ringer and see how you respond. Have somebody put pressure on you and see if you can push back in the right way. So I wanted to make sure that you guys understand the top negotiation courses in the world. I have taken them, and I'm giving you 3 simple but important skills that I want you guys to learn, because if you, especially a lot of my audience here, real estate agents, you are the negotiator. You're the expert that's supposed to help sellers and buyers negotiate something that's really big and it's really important to them. And so I want to make sure that you guys understand that since most buyers and sellers, by virtue of their profession, are inexperienced negotiators, you got to have those skills. You have to come to the table knowing and understanding how to properly negotiate, because they may not necessarily even understand. So, real estate agents out there, make sure that you know negotiation's a huge skill. It's something that takes experience, and it's something that I think you guys should make sure that you're constantly studying up on, because you want to make sure that you know that negotiation is all a dance. It's part of a skill set. It's something that you've got to do. Each situation's different. People are different. Personality types are different. And you've got to be able to navigate each one in a different way with different circumstances. But the most important thing is I'm always, in some way, shape, or form, using one of my many skills. These are only 3 of them. There's obviously a lot more. And it still takes practice. So I want you guys to understand, I am light years better as a negotiator today than I was 5 years ago. And way more light years against 10 years ago. And so I want you guys to understand, you should be always working to get better. One of my favorite quotes, and we talk about this all the time, is if you think you know it all, like you've reached the pinnacle and there's nothing else you can be taught, you immediately become a depreciating asset in the marketplace. I want you guys to understand that. You should constantly be refining, constantly practicing, constantly working on your craft. And if I'm negotiating for others, that's a part of my skill set that I need to be learning about and constantly working on. So, guys, please let me know down in the Facebook comments on Periscope. Let me know. Did those 3 tips help you? Give me some hearts. Give me some likes. I'm going all in, baby. Give me some stuff, because I'm giving away stuff that I learned from Ivy League schools about how to negotiate. And so, again, I'm giving this knowledge because I want to share it with you guys so that you can do your job better, so that you can be high performers, and so that we can keep from the situations where deals fall apart simply because maybe everyone involved is not a skilled or even inexperienced negotiator for something as big as a house. All right. So guys, we're about at the 7:27 mark Central Time. Thank you so much for your attention, number one. It means a lot to me. Your attention is the most valuable thing in the world, and I want to thank you guys for stopping in and watching this live episode of Office Hours. But don't go anywhere, because this is my favorite part of the show, because this is where we're going to get into your Q&A. So if there's something that's been filtering, you guys, I see you're filtering in and out. Thank you for the love on Periscope. Y'all are blowing it up. I love it. So guys, I want you to understand that if you got a question, post it in the comments on Facebook or on Twitter. Use the hashtag Office Hours. It could be related to negotiation or anything about real estate, sales, marketing. Let's talk about it. So thank you so much for your attention. My name is Chris Donaldson. Hannah.
Yes.
Let's go into the questions.
Okay.
So Hannah off screen over here is gonna bring me the questions so that I can focus on you guys.
Okay, so we have a couple questions from Malachi Lindsay on Facebook.
Shout out to Malachi. What's up, my man? Glad you came on tonight, babe.
All right. So the first one we have is, how do you handle negotiations when you're negotiating on behalf of someone else, like in a real estate deal, for example? So that's the first one we have.
Malachi, good question. And so really it's exactly the same. You're just using these skills on behalf of someone else, and the gap is communication. So if I'm performing a negotiation for you, the biggest deal is I'm explaining to you every step of the way. I'm communicating to you every step of the way why I'm doing things or want you to do things a certain way. Why, from our position, I think we should do X or we should do Y. So the gap there is I'm using those skills. I don't need to tell you I'm using my negotiation skills. I want to communicate with you as my client to give you the best possible outcome. That's the gap. So it's just communication. So in that example I was using earlier, think of the lowball buyer, the guy that wants to get a really good deal. Well, I'm great with that. I would love for you to get that house for $1 if I could do that. I would hang that up and be like, this is my crowning negotiation achievement. But the real deal here is if I'm prepared and I'm a professional negotiator and I want to make sure that that buyer doesn't lose out on a house, then I want to communicate with them. And so I would say, why do you want to make that offer? Just explain it to me. Let's talk about it. Let's look at the numbers so that when we begin, right, when we write up that offer, those 7 legal pages of stuff in my home state of Louisiana, that we understand what our best alternative is, what our position is, what we think it's worth, and be willing to be reasonable, right? Because just because you come up with a random number, Mr. Buyer, doesn't mean that number makes any sense. So that's where diffusing that anchor for my own clients sometimes may come in. So Malachi, great question. And in my opinion, the answer is communication. Making sure that they understand the reason that we're making moves the way that we are. But then remember, ultimately, who makes the call? It's your client. You can't make them offer anything. You can't make them counter anything. You can just explain. You can give them their alternatives. They ultimately make the decision. Communication, always. Good question, though.
All right. So I actually have a question of my own.
Okay. Hannah's got a question. She's all right.
I do. So since I have a very soft and sweet personality,
you do.
I'm not very
she
good
does.
at standing my ground with certain things. So how do you think that what do you think would be the best approach for me as far as my negotiation? Do you have any tips on how I could just stand my ground a little
Okay,
better?
so Hannah, for those of you that probably can't hear, she's a soft, sweet spoken Southern lady that just wonderful disposition, and she wants to know, is that something, or how does she handle negotiation when she is kind of soft-natured? She's the kind of person, not like me, that comes at you a million miles an hour, right? What is the best strategy? What's the best tactic for her? Is that about right?
Yeah.
And basically, guys, here's the thing. That's why I'm talking about negotiation as a skill and not something that you're born with. Because there are great negotiators that have all sorts of different skill sets, all sorts of different dispositions, and they accomplish their goals maybe in different ways, but ultimately they're handling a lot of it the same way. So for somebody like Hannah that may be soft-spoken and easygoing, what she needs to understand, and probably the most important for those types of folks, is really tip number 1, is to stand your ground, know your best alternative, know your foundation, and be willing, as I say, be willing to make that the hill that you die on. So in other words, if Hannah knows that her house is worth X, and she's got this super aggressive real estate agent like Chris Donaldson coming at her, and they keep on and they keep on and they keep on, it doesn't matter how Hannah speaks or how her disposition is. It matters that she holds her ground. It matters that you do the right thing. There's 500 ways to say the right thing. And so one of the things that we want to understand is, regardless of your personality type, one of the things that I'll share with you guys is the next level is emotional intelligence. as an example, I'm talking to you guys. I'm on live TV here, so I'm a little fired up because I love Wednesdays and talking to y'all. But if I was negotiating with Hannah, I would take it down 15 notches. And I would talk to her, and we do it all the time because she works here. And we have much more calm discussions. We look at things differently. And I also understand the most important thing is that Hannah can quietly and sweetly tell me something that really cuts to the bone, right? Like, bless your heart. Oh, man, I know what you mean. So I don't think disposition as much is important with negotiation. It's getting the end result and the skill. So, all right, this is a bonus tip. I can't help myself, guys. So the alternative of Hannah, super nice, soft-smoking, country girl, nice little southern accent. What's the alternative? That super mean, aggressive, ugly, nasty person on the other end of a negotiation. Guys, comment or like, give me some hearts on Periscope if you've ever been in a negotiation with someone that's just irreverent. They're just rude and mean and makes everything twice as difficult as it needs to be. If that's ever happened to you, give us some love. Let me know, because it certainly happened to me. And so one of the responses to Hannah that I'll offer to you guys is that being rude or being mean is not a strategy. In fact, it doesn't make people think you're tough. It doesn't make people think you're more knowledgeable. You don't have to be a jerk to get what you want or feel that you deserve. So actually, it's one of the funniest things that I see, and one of the biggest experiences that I had as a new real estate agent is that I experienced and I encountered a lot of rude real estate agents on the other end of the transaction. Hopefully none of you guys watching, probably not, right? But just rude for no reason, just mean, nasty people. Maybe it's just how they are, or they were having a bad day, whatever, but I got the other end of it. And what I'll tell you guys is that doesn't help your client. It doesn't help your reputation. And I promise you, if I've got a client that is looking next time in a subdivision where you have a listing and then your competitor has a listing, and I'm like, do I want to deal with her again? Or can we try to deal with him because I haven't had a bad experience and he's not mean and he won't abuse us? You see, you've got a reputation to uphold. Being mean is not a strategy, and it doesn't make you look like a tough negotiator either. In fact, the meaner you are, you're more like a cornered animal to me. And it's more like, I got you where I want you. Because the more mad you get, you're not giving me any facts. You're not giving me any information. You're not presenting your position. You're just getting louder and meaner, thinking that's going to make me back down. And as an experienced negotiator and somebody that understands the process, I'm listening to what you're saying, not how you're saying it. And so you can be as mean as you want. It's not going to change my position. The facts of the situation are going to change our position. So, Hannah, I'm glad you asked that question. And really, that's the one of my fire-up moments. That's the best I can say. So I'm trying to look and catch some on my own. Do we have any others coming in from Facebook or Twitter?
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat the question because I know she's saying it. She's right here. So hang on. What else we got?
We have a couple people actually wanting to know if you know of any good books to read on negotiation. Anything like that, or just books in general that'll help them with...
I love it. You guys always want to read and you want to study. I like that. Let me think. A really good book on negotiation. Actually, let me look up the title, because yeah, there you go. It's called Negotiation, and it's from the Harvard Business Essentials. That's one book that I would recommend. And another one that I would recommend is an international bestseller. It's one of the all-time biggest reads in negotiation, which is called Getting to Yes. And I've read that one as well. And it's called Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In. But really, that helps you dissect the idea of what a real win-win negotiation looks like, and as opposed to everything is a battle and everything has to be a win-lose. So Harvard Business Essentials Negotiation, and I forgot off the top of my head, so thank you for asking. Getting to Yes, I really like that one. I've read that one myself as well. So And of course, the Superstars 2.0 class of negotiation is pretty good too. I would recommend that one. All right. Anything else? Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, and we have a question.
Keep asking, guys. We'll go till 8:00 if you've got questions. This is the Q&A section, so we're going to go as long as you guys are getting value.
We have another question from Malachi.
All right.
And yes, I will type them I will type the answers in the comments, by the way. But we do have a question: where is the best place to dive deeper into negotiations training? Which I think you just said in the Superstar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you heard what I said, right? I really felt that negotiation was sort of an area that I could work on, that I could do better in when I was analyzing myself as a CEO and as an entrepreneur. And so I went and sought out training. I asked people. I looked for high-level stuff. I wanted to figure it out. And so, I went into these different programs, and it costs a lot of money. But the biggest lesson that I got, besides specific skills, is really practice and role play with someone else in a particular position, type of situation that gets you in trouble, is really one of the best things you can do. So Malachi, knowing you got your buddy Matt there in the office, I'm dead serious when I tell you this. Rather than looking for the greatest book in the world that's going to turn you into a great negotiator, no, it's going to give you skills and you're going to start to find trends. The best thing you can do is practice negotiating with Matt. Y'all sit there and give yourself, act like the person that gives you the most trouble and practice strategies on how to get around it. So, for instance, sit down and say, all right, today we're going to practice diffusing an anchor. And so you play the role of the buyer with the super low offer and then make Matt diffuse that and see if he does, or vice versa. I think practice is one of the best ways to dive deeper. So Malachi, reading books is great. Read those too and then get back to me. Shoot me an email. I'll give you other stuff. But take the skills, take the information and practice and use it. That's how you're going to get better at it. Like I can give you, remember if y'all saw last time's office hours, I can give you a book on how to swing a golf club perfectly, just like Jack Nicklaus or Ben Hogan. But what's the point? Here's the book. But if you don't go out there and start practicing that swing and hit a zillion golf balls and go through the situations and hit and practice, you're not going to get any better at it. So make sure that you understand, don't get addicted to just reading books on it. Read the book, take the skills from it, and implement them and practice them and master them. So that's the best advice I can give you on that one.
That's what we have right now.
All right. So guys, this week's office hours, all about negotiation. So let me give you a quick recap, okay? At the end of the day, a lot of people, negotiation is something that is a skill. So it's something that needs to be learned. It's something that needs to be practiced. It's something that you don't just are naturally born a great negotiator, right? And that's the difference between somebody that's like a dictator of a country, as an example. They're not a great negotiator. They just threaten you with death. Well, that's not appropriate. So to become a great negotiator, you've got to have a skill set. So we gave you 3 skills, and I still have the cards here. So as a quick recap, tip number 1 is to know your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Make sure you understand that if you ask for X, you know that you're willing to accept Y. Okay? Make sure you know that if you don't get what you want, are you willing to walk away from the table? In other words, know your actual position before you start. Because if not, that's, for instance, where you get the buyers in real estate transactions that you said, what's your final and best, client? Like, help me get you this house here. How high are you willing to go? And then they get in a competitive offer situation. They lose out on the house, and then they're mad at me, or worse, they fire me when they were the ones that simply didn't offer enough. So it's explaining and communicating, making sure we know, listen, how high are you really willing to go? Let's be fair based on market data. Let's understand it and make sure you know that position before you start. Tip number 2 is make sure that you know the proper way to diffuse an anchor. So an anchor is that early anchor, that early boom, putting the stake in the ground, which tends to frame negotiations, which tends to frame the arguments. And remember, the best way to diffuse that is to immediately provide feedback from your side of the table. So if you give me an offer that is just so far away from where I am, I'm going to immediately make sure I tell you that. Not in an emotional way, not in any sort of ugly way, but say, okay, that's really far off where we were thinking. So I want to make sure that you understand where our position is, and make sure you immediately turn around and say, that what you're saying in a professional way is that offer's absurd, right? Maybe. And then tip number 3 is prepare, prepare, prepare. Never show up to a negotiation of any kind, especially when you're working for a client, unprepared. You've got to know your market stats. You've got to know the comps. You have to know what is going on with this particular property and everything involved. Prepare, 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 because otherwise you end up going into a negotiation from a position where you don't have all the facts, and you might realize you lost out on something you could have had because you didn't have the facts, or worse, it just makes you look bad. And then it's like putting a blindfold on and trying to get things done. You've got to make sure that you come prepared. So we talk about preparation all the time in our training programs. So we want to make sure that that's a consistent theme, and that includes negotiation. So guys, thank you so much for tuning into Office Hours. Again, we will be doing this every Wednesday night because we are in the process. This is the season leading up to the next Superstars 2.0 training program. So you guys that are alumni, make sure like and comment. It's so good to see you guys. If you're interested in diving in to subjects like negotiation, if you want to get deeper, if you want to practice, if you want those skills, then I have developed a whole training program. It's 6 weeks, every Wednesday, 9 to 2, plus online components and other information just for you. Because I know Malachi is watching. He's an alumni. Matt, that I mentioned, he's an alumni. And these folks are doing just amazing things with their real estate careers because they're learning these skills and then they're deploying them in the marketplace, which is helping them against the other agents and making sure that they're prepared right out the gate as a brand new agent, that they can get out there and get the job done. So if you're interested in that program, Hannah's going to link it below. I'd love to see you guys. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. We will see you next week on an all-new Office Hours.